Vam Kamsachanuramaddanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishno Vande Jagadgurum. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our ongoing class on Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna. We've started on chapter 6 of the Gita, a wonderful chapter, wide-ranging, that focuses on the practice of meditation. And hopefully today we'll be covering the verses that start discussing how we should meditate, where we should meditate. Okay. So, but we're starting with verse 7. And so please open your apps to 6.7 and please repeat after me. Jitatmanaha prashantasya Paramatma samahitaha shitoshna sukhadukkeshu tatha manapamanayoh. All right. So let's look at as usual, we look at the Anvaya first, which is it's a rearrangement of the words to make the meaning clear. Shita means cold. Ushna means hot, so heat. Sukha, happiness. Dukkheshu, dukkha, sadness, depression. Tatha mana apamanayoho. Mana means when you get honor from other people, respect and reverence. Apamana is the exact opposite. I'm used to getting both pretty regularly. So it's a great opportunity for spiritual practice. Okay. Jitatmanaha. One who has conquered the Atman. So here, see the word Atman in the Gita, it's like all bets are. You have to understand the meaning of the word Atman based on the context of each verse. Because in some cases it could mean the highest self. In other places it could mean the individual self. In other places it can mean the mind, just the ordinary mind. So here, jitatmanaha, if you're conquering the self, that can't be referring to the supreme self or the higher self. It should be the mind, right? So almost all the commentators take it to mean the conquering of the lower self, the sense-oriented mind, the one that's attracted to worldly things. Okay. Prashantasya, calm. That person is calm. Paramatma samahitaha. But where's the word for... Right. So in the midst of all of these dualities, all these pairs of opposites, heat, cold, happiness, sadness, elation, depression, honor, dishonor, that person who remains completely unperturbed, who can maintain poise and equanimity in the midst of all that, prashantasya, who's also extremely calm, paramatma samahita. And then this last phrase is kind of interesting. Paramatma, literally it means supreme self. But then different commentators have different understandings of what that could mean. But Sri Aurobindo takes it to mean supreme self. Parama means supreme and Atma means self. Paramatma samahitaha. This is even more interesting. Samahitaha, some of you might recognize that it comes from the same root word as samadhi. Okay. And so it could mean concentrated, it could mean in samadhi. So Sri Aurobindo literally takes it to mean in samadhi. But the interesting thing here is it's the Paramatma which is in samadhi. What does it mean for the self to be in samadhi? Stable, yeah, fixed, poised. So this is another way that Sri Aurobindo, he says, this then is the supreme self in a man, the Paramatma, founded and poised, even in his outwardly conscious human being, in cold and heat, pleasure and pain, as well as in honor and dishonor. Okay, so let's look at this word for word, but let me just read Sri Aurobindo's translation first. When one has conquered oneself, so that's a jitatmana, meaning this sense-oriented mind, and attained to the calm of a perfect self-mastery and self-possession, that's how he's rendering this prashantasya. Then is the supreme self in a man, paramatma, founded and poised, samahitaha, even in his outwardly conscious human being, in cold and heat, pleasure and pain, as well as in honor and dishonor. Now, a few things to mention here. First of all, let's look at Sri Aurobindo's commentary on this verse. It's footnote 1 in this book that I've been reading, but I'll just read it out to you. So, That is the spirit in which the liberated man does works. He does them without desire and attachment, without the egoistic personal will and the mental seeking which is the parent of desire. He has conquered his lower self, jitatmanaha, reached the perfect calm, prashantasya, in which his highest self is manifest to him. See, here, this is interesting. The Paramatma, his highest self, is manifest to him. So he's taking samahitaha, at least part of the meaning to mean is manifest to him. The Supreme Self is always present, but it's either covered over with layers of impurity or it's manifest to us. And actually, I think Sri Aurobindo here will agree with Shankara, because Shankara also takes the samahitaha to mean manifest. Because we're always the Supreme Self, we just don't know it. We suffer from ignorance. So this is one of those few places where Shankara and Sri Aurobindo seem to agree with each other. Samahita means the Supreme Self is manifest to this realized soul. And then he adds, and this is where he's emphasizing this samadhi root word, that highest self always concentrated in its own being, samahita, in samadhi. And then he adds something really interesting. Sri Aurobindo says, he explains what it means for the self to be always in samadhi. Not only in the trance of the inward drawn consciousness. That's what most people understand by samadhi, right? Samadhi is this kind of trance state, spiritual state of trance in which you lose external consciousness. That's what it means. Not only in the trance of the inward drawn consciousness, but always in the waking state of the mind as well. In exposure to the causes of desire and of the disturbance of calm, to grief and pleasure, heat and cold, honor and disgrace, all dualities. This higher self is the akshara, bhutastha. Okay, so first of all, Sri Aurobindo is explaining the Paramatma, as always, he's interpreting chapter 6 as a meditation on the impersonal, non-dual self. Okay, and the bhakti element is not yet emphasized here. There are little hints of it here and there, but primarily it's the focus on the non-dual, impersonal self. And I think this is a really important point he makes here. He's really trying to draw out the implications of the Paramatma being samahitaha, concentrated in samadhi. And his point is, you can be in samadhi not just in a state of trance in which you lose external consciousness, but equally while engaged in the world, engaging with the world, right? And Sri Ramakrishna would say, why should I see God only with my eyes closed? Can't I see God with the eyes open as well? So I think this is exactly what Sri Aurobindo is talking about here. And the term used in traditional Indian traditions is sahaja samadhi. Sahaja samadhi means it's an effortless samadhi. It's not even just like a momentary state in which you lose external consciousness, but literally right now I can be talking to you and also be in the samadhi. I'm not. But
that's the calm mastery.
The calm self-mastery, yeah, right, exactly.
That he mentions.
Yeah, and so what he's emphasizing here is, notice the verse is talking about how you should be equal in the face of all these opposites. He then called honor, dishonor. What does honor and dishonor imply? It means you're still engaging in the world. You're interacting with other human beings. You might be going to work and raising a family, and your kid is insulting you, and I've seen in the U.S. I've only seen in the U.S. that sometimes kids will refer to their mother by their first name. It's kind of disconcerting, but anyway. Okay, so that's important. So that I think Sri Aurobindo, it's useful that he brings out that aspect of samahitaha. Ramanuja, I've talked about Ramanuja a lot in this class, but for those of you who don't remember, he interprets all these verses. Of course, Ramanuja is a great bhakta, and the supreme reality to him was Vishnu, right? But he says that a prerequisite for practicing bhakti is jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. And jnana yoga for him means meditating on your true nature as the jivatman, the individual self, separate from the body-mind complex. Okay. So this Paramatma poses a bit of a problem for him, because the Parama seems to mean supreme, and when he interprets supreme self in other places in the scriptures, he takes it to mean Vishnu. But he doesn't think that's what it can mean here, because bhakti hasn't really entered into the Gita yet. This chapter is supposed to be focusing on jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. So what he does is he says, yes, the Paramatma here is not actually the supreme in a literal sense. It's the individual soul. And it's Parama, it's a kind of eulogy of the individual self. It's such a great realization to realize that you are a jivatman, an individual soul, separate from the body-mind complex, that the word Parama is used. Not supreme, but in the sense of great. Sri Ramakrishna, remember I've mentioned this many times, but in regard to the 6 chakras, he says when your consciousness is elevated from the lower 3 centers, the organ of generation and evacuation and the navel, to the heart center, he says then you have the realization of the jivatman, the individual soul, in the shape of a flame. And the sadhaka says, eki, what is this? What is this? It's an extraordinary spiritual realization, but because for so many lifetimes we've identified mistakenly with the body-mind complex. So Ramanuja here is saying the Paramatma, the Parama here doesn't mean Supreme Self, but it means this. You realize the greatness of your true nature as the individual soul, separate from the body-mind complex. But Sri Aurobindo is happy to take it to mean the Supreme Self. Shankara here also takes it to mean the Supreme Self. But even though there are other philosophical differences between Shankara and Sri Aurobindo. Okay, so the only other thing I wanted to mention here is, as always, whenever the Gita refers to the characteristics, the attributes of a realized soul, there's always this question, well, how is it relevant to us? We're struggling spiritual aspirants. And so Shankara says in his commentary on the Sthita Prajna Lakshana, on the characteristics of the Sthita Prajna, the realized soul in chapter 2 of the Gita, Shankara always says, those qualities or characteristics that come naturally to a realized soul, we as spiritual aspirants should try to cultivate with effort, right? We should struggle to acquire those same. It doesn't come naturally to us because we haven't realized God, but we should try to cultivate them. So what's an example? Shita Ushna. When I first moved to India, I just decided that I would only take cold showers. And that sounds like it might be easy in a tropical country like India, but in the winter it actually gets really cold. And then if you go to places like Mayavati, it gets excruciatingly cold, as Alice knows, people who've been to Mayavati. But it's just a practice, right? The idea is no matter how cold it is, you still take cold showers. And it's painful, right? But then it's like this, what Gita says about sattvika forms of happiness, that in the beginning it's like poison and in the end it becomes like nectar. That's something about cold showers. If you stick with it, it like triggers some things in the body, like white blood cells, and then you get this rush, and it's quite fun. Anyway, that's just one example. But Sukha Dukhesh is even more interesting. What does it mean to be equal in happiness and sadness? It's very interesting because happiness seems like something that you either are or you aren't. But what it's suggesting is that you should try to take a step back from even your own mental states, whether positive or negative. So I see this as a kind of mindfulness technique, a mindfulness practice. When you're happy, you should take a step back from the happiness and say, well, the mind is happy. This is a mental state of happiness, and don't get attached to it. When the mind is in a state of dejection, depression, sadness, you can at the same time take a step back from that and say, you know what, it's just the mind that's going through doldrums. But I'm not. I'm unaffected as the eternal divine soul, right? In psychology, I recently started doing a little research on this, but there's a technique that is similar to Buddhist mindfulness and Vedantic mindfulness. It's called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. Does anyone know about this? So I don't know to what extent this lady who developed it actually is indebted to Indian spiritual traditions, but there are remarkable similarities. It's very funny how, like in modern psychology, and even in schools, they have mindfulness practices. They never talk about the spiritual sources that they get the stuff from, like when they talk about yoga, for instance. But it's just the same stuff. But they package it in a way that doesn't seem... I think they're afraid of being religious or sectarian, so they package it in that way, in a kind of non-sectarian way. Okay, so with all that said, why don't we go on to the next verse? Very important next verse. Please repeat after me. Jnana Vijnana Triptatma Kutastho Vijitendriyaha Yukta Iti Uchyate Yogi Samaloshta Ashmakanchanaha. All right, so this is 6.8. Jnana and Vijnana, these two key terms that I've been harping on for this entire class. This is the first occurrence of the... Are they the first occurrence? Or maybe no, they came in chapter 3, I think. But this might be the second occurrence in chapter 6, 6.8, Jnana and Vijnana. And so the stuff I wrote on the board is all concerns how different commentators have interpreted these two key terms, Jnana and Vijnana. Jnana Vijnana Triptatma literally just means he or she whose self is contented with Jnana and Vijnana. Tripta means contented or satisfied. Satisfied with both Jnana and Vijnana. Okay? But what exactly do Jnana and Vijnana mean? That's the big question, the $1,000,000 question here. Okay, and I'm going to be a little critical of Sri Aurobindo here because I feel like it was a missed opportunity for him. Vijita, but we'll get to that in a second. Vijita Indriyaha. Vijita, remember the word Jita Atma from the previous verse? So the same Jita. So one who has completely conquered his Indriyas, senses, including the mind. In the Gita, the mind is considered the sixth sense, not in the creepy Bruce Willis sense or whatever, but it means the mind of there are the five senses, sight and whatever, and then there's also the mind. It's included as an Indriya. So one who has conquered the mind and all the senses. Sama Loshta Ashma Kanchanaha, also very interesting. One to whom clay, Loshta, Ashma, stone, and Kanchana, gold. Does the word Kanchana ring any bells for you devotees of Ramakrishna? The phrase that comes up again and again in his teachings is renunciation of Kamini Kanchana, right? So that Kanchana there, gold. He means by it, it's a metaphor for money, or not metaphor, but it stands in for material possessions, money, right? But it literally means gold actually. So Sama Loshta Ashma Kanchanaha. Yogi, that yogi, yuktaha iti uchyate. That yogi can be considered to be yukta. The term yukta is really important throughout this chapter. What exactly does it mean? We'll talk about it. Different commentaries have different views. It'll come up again and again in different verses here. And it may have subtly different shades of meaning in different verses, but it comes from the dhatu, the verbal root, yuj, which means to connect or unite. So that person, so Sri Aurobindo renders it as in yoga, where yoga is understood as a kind of uniting with the divine, connecting with the divine. Okay. Okay, that's important. And I'm giving you a big clue to the study questions for our next class. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, by the way, the heads up for the next class. So I don't know my June schedule yet, so I can't tell you what days our classes in June will be held. But it'll be sometime in June. And the assignment is to read verses 15 to 23 of chapter 6 of the Gita. We'll continue to discuss chapter 6. So no new reading from Essays on the Gita because he covers the entire chapter 6 in one chapter, as you remember. But there are study questions. You guys got a nice little break of over a month, I believe, without study questions, and now we're back. So there are going to be some study questions, not too hard. And they're both, there's a practical question in there also about how important is food in your spiritual life, and how and what we eat, how important is that to you, and why or why not, because that comes up in these verses that we're going to be discussing next time. And the study questions are based primarily on verses 17 to 18 of chapter 6, and it involves the word yukta. Okay, what exactly does yukta mean? How does Sri Aurobindo interpret the term in those verses, and how do other commentators interpret them? Okay, so now back to this verse. I was explaining that. So, Vijita Indriyaha, Samaloshta Ashma Kanchanaha. This one, what story in Sri Ramakrishna's life does this remind us of? This equal to, or one who looks upon clay and stone and gold as the same, huh?
When he was throwing the coins and the rocks in the water.
Yeah, exactly. And he used this Bengali phrase, and he kept saying as a spiritual practice, Mati Taka, Taka Mati. Mati means dirt, clod. It's like this loshta. And then mati, taka means money. And so he's actually holding in one of his hands coins, and in the other hand he's holding dirt. And he's literally saying mati taka, taka mati. He's equating them, saying they're the same to me. He's training the mind to look at them in the same way, right? Even though, of course, there's a world of difference from a day-to-day standpoint, right? But so he's untraining the mind in a certain way, right? Unlearning the mind. And then he tosses them both into the Ganga. And then he gets worried a little bit. He says, I might offend Mother Lakshmi. the goddess of wealth. And then he's going to get in trouble because Motur Babu is a wealthy patron who looks after his needs, So then he says, I forgot what was the exact prayer that he then prays to Lakshmi and says, please forgive me for doing this, but this is a spiritual practice of mother. Okay, so now let's focus on this jnana and vijnana here. Okay, how do different commentators understand this very important phrase, jnana vijnana triptatma? That person, that realized soul who is satisfied with both jnana and vijnana. Okay, let's look at Shankara first. As always, every time these terms occur as a pair in the Gita, there are a few places where that happens. In chapter 3, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 9. Shankara consistently interprets jnana to mean scriptural knowledge of the non-dual self, of the Atman. That means I read the Upanishads, I read the Gita, I learn about the nature of the self, but it's an intellectual knowledge. Vijnana, by contrast, is a direct spiritual knowledge, a direct spiritual realization of the non-dual self. So it's a difference between intellectual understanding of something and direct spiritual realization. That's how Shankara interprets these terms, and so he interprets it in the same way with respect to this verse, 6.8. Ramanuja. See, you always have to keep in mind their underlying philosophical framework, the background philosophical framework. That informs how they interpret these terms. So now, with Ramanuja, how does he interpret jnana? It's the spiritual knowledge, the direct spiritual realization of the Jivatman. That I'm an individual soul, eternal, divine soul, separate from the body-mind complex. And vijnana is, it's kind of, the two things are interrelated and they're complementary for Ramanuja. Vijnana is the knowledge of the difference between the individual soul and the body-mind complex. So one is, I realize myself as the individual soul, and then that goes along with, when you have that jnana, that automatically this vijnana comes, which is that you realize that you're distinct from the body-mind complex. And it's this wondrous realization. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, the sadhaka, when you have that realization, says, what is this? What is this? Right? So they're kind of, they go hand in hand for Ramanuja. But it's all concerning the Jivatman, the individual soul. This is not about God and it's not about the non-dual self for Ramanuja. Now Sri Aurobindo, this is why I feel a little disappointed with Sri Aurobindo's interpretation. Because he doesn't even distinguish the two terms. He lumps them both together and calls them self-knowledge. Satisfied with self-knowledge. And so I find it a little strange. I mean, I can see why he doesn't want to emphasize it so much. It's because, this is my understanding of why he doesn't. Because remember, for Sri Aurobindo, in chapter 6, bhakti is not yet a prominent theme. The Purushottama concept, the idea of God being the impersonal, personal, divine, has not yet been introduced. And so he doesn't want to help himself to this more bhakti-oriented, Purushottama-oriented kind of interpretation of these terms. Okay. And so he's trying to interpret it from the standpoint of this impersonal self, without really the bhakti element. But, one chapter later, so in chapter 7 at the very beginning, in verse 2, the terms are used again, jnanam teham savijnanam. And Sri Aurobindo has a field day. And Krishna says, I'm going to teach you now, Arjuna, about jnana and vijnana. And then Sri Aurobindo says, jnana here means, so this is what we've been talking about from the beginning. Sri Aurobindo, when he encounters the terms jnana and vijnana, starting in chapter 7, he interprets them along the lines of Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna would say that jnana is the direct spiritual realization of the non-dual self, the non-dual Atman. And then Ramakrishna says, vijnana is the even more expansive and greater realization, the comprehensive realization, that the divine is not just impersonal but also personal, both with and without form, and that divine, that impersonal, personal Purushottama has manifested as everything in this world. So Aurobindo refers to that vijnana as the integral knowledge of the divine. So instead of just having knowledge of the non-dual self, you realize the impersonal, personal Purushottama manifesting as everything in this world. Okay? So I guess I'm just a little puzzled as to why, if Sri Aurobindo interprets the terms jnana and vijnana in chapter 7.2, in verse 2 of chapter 7, in this Ramakrishnan way, I don't see why he couldn't have just interpreted the terms Jnana and Vijnana here as well in the same way. I see why. It's because he doesn't want to bring in the Purushottama Bhakti element. But on the other hand, even Sri Aurobindo admits that even in the early chapters, like in chapter 3, you do get some elements of bhakti. Mai sarvani karmani sanyas. Krishna says, whatever you do, do them as an offering to me. And that famous matparaha, that phrase I've been mentioning many, many times in this class in chapter 2, this tiny little phrase. In the context of chapter 2, Krishna is saying again and again to Arjuna, you are the non-dual self, you are the non-dual self. And then suddenly he says, but keep your mind intent on me, thinking of me, matparaha. There's a little hint of bhakti even in chapter 2. In chapter 3 it becomes slightly more prominent, where there's a mention in that verse 3.30, I think, on bhakti-oriented karma yoga. So here too, I just feel like one could perfectly well, from an Aurobindonian / Ramakrishnan standpoint, we can interpret this 6.8 as also giving a little hint of bhakti here. And saying that the realized soul, dhyana yoga, the practice of meditation, is one practice among others. You can combine it with bhakti yoga. You can combine it with karma yoga. In order to realize ultimately the Purushottama. And yourself as a manifestation of that Purushottama. So I don't see why you can't take 6.8 to be the ideal state of the Vijnani, basically. But Sri Aurobindo doesn't take it that way, as far as I can tell. So this is maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's saying, and you have some other justification for why he lumps these two terms together and calls them self-knowledge. But I feel like this is a missed opportunity for him, and that I think he could have given a nice, consistent interpretation of Jnana and Vijnana here as well, in terms of this Ramakrishnan knowledge of the impersonal non-dual self as Jnana, and then the integral knowledge of the impersonal personal Purushottama.
But he doesn't stop at knowledge. He says tranquil and self-poised, master of his senses, regarding alike. So when you regard it alike, that means all that duality is gone. He
That's
just
true.
starts with knowledge, but he's talking about Vijnana in that sense.
Well, I don't know if we can jump to Vijnana. I think,
look at everything the same.
But I think even the Vijnani will look at everything the same in that way. Like Totapuri, who was pure Jnani before he met Sri Ramakrishna. He had all these, he exhibited all these characteristics. He didn't look upon gold as any different from cloud and stone. So I still see this whole verse as kind of embodying the ideal of the person who has realized the impersonal non-dual self.
Swami,
That's how
does embody that ideal, but he's tracking the Gita. He's not getting
Yeah.
there any sooner than the Gita gets there, and you want him to get there sooner, so you're superimposing.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying.
He's actually following the text.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah.
Following the rhythm. He hasn't hit.
Right, I know.
Okay, he's not-
Yeah, no, I get it. And that's what I'm saying too. But at the same time, he also acknowledges little words here and there which hint at bhakti, right? Like I told you, matparaha.
Exactly. So he's doing the dance of the seven veils. So he's
Right. Yeah, but here, I think that the giveaway term, which already indicates the Purushottama and bhakti, is yukta. Because he himself, a couple verses later, I'm just anticipating here, but this is regarding the study questions for next week, but 6.17, the term yukta comes up a million times. Yukta hara viharasya, yukta cheshtasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya. So you should be yukta in eating, you should be yukta in sleeping, the amount you sleep, and you should be yukta in this and that, in all your waking activities, day-to-day activities.
Keep reading and he'll explain that to you.
Yeah, right. And so, but yukta here in 6.17, he has no problem saying yukta. He goes back to the root and then says it means really deeply, most fundamentally, in union with the divine, being connected with the divine in the midst of all of your activities. And the divine here, I think, needs to be interpreted as the Purushottama. So in 6.17, he's happy to read the Purushottama in the verse 17. I'm not sure why he's so reluctant to do that in the context of 6.8. Yeah. So anyway, but I get what you're saying. I mean, I get that too. Anyway, it's an open question. Let's see what other people have to say about it. Okay. So let's move on. This is 6.9. Please repeat after me. Suhrit, Mitra, Ari, Udasina, Madhyastha, Dveshya, Bandhushu, Sadhushu, Apicha, Papeshu, Samabuddhihi, Vishishyate. All right. Oh, sorry. Before I go on to explain verse 8, I didn't mention Swami Tapasyananda's interpretation. He interprets jnana in 6.8 to mean wisdom. Wait, is this 6.7? No, it is 6.8, yeah. Wisdom or knowledge. And vijnana as experience. I don't know how that tracks with respect to other commentators exactly. It feels a little bit wishy-washy. Wisdom sounds like it's something elevated and not just intellectual knowledge. Knowledge sounds like it could be more dry intellectual knowledge. That would be more along the lines of Shankara. Vijnana, experience, clearly suggests spiritual realization. So Tapasyananda, interestingly, it kind of is like the Aurobindo situation where, because we'll find out when Tapasyananda comes to chapter 7, verse 2, he also has a field day like Sri Aurobindo, and he brings in Ramakrishna's teachings on jnana and vijnana. So neither Tapasyananda nor Sri Aurobindo interprets jnana and vijnana along the lines of Ramakrishna here in 6.8 for some reason. The reason being what Anthony mentions, which is because maybe in chapter 6 this bhakti has not yet been introduced in a formal, explicit way, and so they're kind of holding back.
But experience could mean vijnana because that's how you are experiencing life, with that wisdom and knowledge.
Right.
With that
it could,
jnana,
but I sort of feel like
now
he's
experiencing that wisdom and knowledge
I know.
in your life.
But there's so
with
many
everything
spiritual
you're
experiences,
doing.
right?
No, in
But-
everything you do,
yeah,
your
yeah.
actions in your life are based on that wisdom, on that jnana,
Yeah.
and it's expressed in that vijnana when you interact with.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
do
but
you
even
get an experience
right,
when
but
you
even
interact?
right, but even Shankara will understand vijnana in that way, that it's a spiritual knowledge. The problem is Tapasyananda doesn't actually elaborate on what he means. He just uses the one term experience, and there's no footnote on it to clarify what he means. It could be the experience of the non-dual self. It could be the experience of the jivatma. It could be the experience of the divine. We don't know exactly. It just seems to be generically spiritual experience. So yeah. Anyway, I just sort of feel a little disappointed by both Tapasyananda and by Sri Aurobindo on this front, to be honest. Okay. So now 6.9. This is kind of, I mean, it's you might think it's minor and we shouldn't split hairs, but it is kind of interesting from a kind of psychological standpoint. Basically, there's this like a laundry list of people to whom we should feel equal to, like not look at them differently, and it's a very interesting laundry list, because the first two terms, again, this is one of those cases where Sri Aurobindo also just kind of lumps these first two terms together and calls them one thing. Surit and Mitra. Okay, these are the two terms. Surit and Mitra. Sri Aurobindo lumps them together and calls them both friend. He doesn't even distinguish the two terms. Like he lumps Jnana and Vijnana together and calls them himself now. He says Surat and Mitra, he doesn't distinguish them. He says that just means friend. Because the problem is both those terms typically just mean friend. Kind of, like in a general way. So now, different commentators have very creative and ingenious ways of distinguishing the meaning of these two terms in subtle ways. So Shankara, for instance, suggests that Surit here means a benefactor who doesn't expect anything in return. He does something nice for you, but without expecting anything from you. Okay. Whereas Mitra is one who does good to you, but out of affection for you. Because he loves you, because he's your friend or he's a relative or something like that. Okay. So this very nuanced distinction. Ramanuja is very interesting. He says Surat means a well-wisher, one who wishes you well, in spite of the fact that he might be much older or much younger than you, in spite of an age difference. So Ramanuja is bringing in a difference. And then he says, by contrast, the Mitra is a well-wisher, somebody who wishes you well, but knowing that you're in the same age group as he is. Right? So it's very interesting. I mean, they have different ways of thinking about it. But the point is, why is this any of this? Well, so Aurobindo, as I said, just takes them both to mean friend. Tapasyananda makes a somewhat mysterious contrast, or not contrast, but distinction by saying Surat is friend and Mitra is comrade. So what's the difference between friend and comrade? Your communist friend. No, I'm joking. But it means more or less the same thing. Maybe a more distant friend, or I don't know what that, neighbor, I don't know. So anyway, it's a little tricky about how you distinguish Surat and Mitra.
Compañero,
Campan, yeah. Hombre, yeah, you're right. So,
communist in Spanish.
I see. So, but why is it relevant to us? Because I think the Gita is drawing our attention to the fact that we might treat different people differently in subtle ways at an unconscious level without knowing it. And just by generically saying they're all my friends, and that's not good enough. We need to be really mindful and nuanced in, like, even in my friend circle, I might behave differently with different people, depending on how they behave with me and what they expect from me, right? And so I actually think these psychological nuances and subtleties are important to keep in mind. Because we can then analyze ourselves. Wait, even among my friends, I treat friend A in this way, and then I treat friend B in this way. Why is that? And the Gita encourages us to think about why that might be. And then to work on actually treating them in the same way without being affected. Yeah.
Could they mean acquaintances and pals?
Yeah, so pal is more superficial or something? Oh, wait,
No,
which one is
pal
more?
is like a buddy.
Oh, more closer.
Your buddy.
Acquaintance
your
is
friend,
more
a close
distant.
friend. Acquaintance is
Right.
somebody whom you have a connection with, maybe because he or she's done something good for you,
Yeah.
or you've done something. You've had some kind of dealings with each other. Maybe,
Yeah. Right.
Maybe pleasant
yeah.
dealings.
It's tricky. I mean, it's though I think surit actually, just if you look etymologically, rit comes from heart. Hridaya, it's the same word. Surit means one with a good heart. So it's a very positive term. And it suggests things like empathy, compassion, and mitra just means friend, just flat out friend.
Associates and
Well,
friends.
yeah, who knows? So all bets are off, and you can feel free to be creative with your interpretation. I don't think there's one right answer, but I think it's fun to think about how these two terms differ. And then the other terms are easier. Ari means an enemy. Udasina, one who is, here again, there's udasina and madhyastha, there's slight differences. Udasina literally means one who's indifferent to you. Doesn't hate you, doesn't love you, doesn't care, and doesn't think about you at all. How do you feel about that person? You should be equal even to that person. All right. Madhyastha is interesting. This is like somebody who's a kind of arbitrator. There's some people who have a talent for like arbitrating disputes. Even in your friend circle, there might be one person who's always like the diplomat who's like, all right, come on, guys.
Creates more problem.
Uh-huh.
And usually it creates more problem when you arbitrate like that.
Okay, well, it depends. I think it depends on who you're trying to arbitrate. And, yeah.
Peacekeeper.
And then, right, the one who keeps the peace, tries to keep everyone happy. Dveshya bandushu. How does... So those who are favorable to you and those who are against you. And then, this really interesting thing, sadhushu and papeshu cha api. One who maintains samabuddhi, equality, equanimity in the face of both sadhus, extremely saintly, good people, and papeshu, those who are the worst sinners and all that, if you want to call them sinners or whatever, very unethical people. So this reminds me of, I mean, there are a lot of incidents in our tradition that we can think of, like Holy Mother, when she was asked about Amjad, this Muslim thief, that she kind of took under her wing, and she when somebody asked her about, well, why are you treating him like that, like as if, you've known him for a long time, and she says, just as I think of Sharat, and Sharat is her beloved Sharadananji, who this great monk, disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who looks after her every need. She says, exactly in the same way do I look upon Amjad, this Muslim thief who I just met, who was planning on robbing me until I pacified him. So there's a very good example of, Holy Mother is a good example of somebody who's completely equal in the face of both sadhus and pape. Literally sadhu, Sharadananda, and papeshu, this Muslim robber. Swamiji, there are many incidents from the life of Swamiji that are similar. One of them is when he's walking in Cairo, and on the other side of the street there are these prostitutes who are heckling him, and he goes over to them and starts weeping, and he says, poor creatures, they have placed their divinity in their external beauty, their physical beauty. Now look at them. And he starts crying. And then they get embarrassed and they start kissing the hem of his robe. And they call him a man of God. Hombre de Dios, hombre de Dios. Is that the right pronunciation? Yeah. Okay. There we go. So that's another example. And there are many, many others you can come up with. So that's the ideal that we should all strive for. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just erase distinctions and think that, that there's no distinction among people. What we should recognize is we shouldn't be fools. We shouldn't be naive. Because then we're not going to be able to engage with people and interact in the right way with people. An example comes to mind when Yoganandaji, Sri Ramakrishna told him to go out to buy a pan for him. And he gave him the money. And then he brings back a pan which has a crack in it. Sri Ramakrishna inspects it, looks, he says, well, you got a pan with a crack in it. He says, well, he's a nice fellow, and I just, and I trusted him. Because he says, it's good to be simple, but it's not good to be a fool. Don't be naive. And he says, it's, a lot of these people, they're trying to bilk you of your money, right? They're trying to rip you off. You should be aware of that. Right? Don't think everybody's a saint. So that's not what the Gita is saying. It's not telling you to be naive and think that everybody is saintly. That's silly. But to recognize that the same divine is at the heart of everyone, in all beings, but that the degree of manifestation varies. And so the difference between a sinner and a saint is really just a difference in the degree of manifestation of the innate divinity. In the saint, there's a greater manifestation of the divine. In a sinner, there are more layers of veils covering over that divine. But still, you should recognize that on a day-to-day basis, you can't, Sri Ramakrishna will say, yes, everything is Narayana. That doesn't mean you should go and hug Tiger Narayana. Don't go and hug tigers thinking that the tiger is God. The tiger is God, but you should behave with the tiger as you would with the normal tiger, right? That's the idea. So keep that in mind as well. It's about, I think what this verse is saying is, you should be aware of the distinctions, but without judgment, without being judgmental, without judging other people for being, your enemy, a sinner, so-and-so. Even the word sinner is problematic, I think, in Vedanta. But still be aware of the differences among human beings and deal with them accordingly.
Swami,
I
don't know if you explained this already, and I apologize if you did, but the phrase in soul, I don't understand what that means.
In soul?
Yeah, equal in soul.
Oh, I see.
What is the in soul aspect of all of this? Because you've been talking about it equal, but what does in soul mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thing is, sometimes in soul, in English, sometimes he could literally mean in like was stationed in the Supreme Self or something like that. I think that might be part of the meaning, is that once you have established your identity as the self, separate from the body-mind complex, then automatically you're going to be equal to friend and enemy and to all these people. But there could be just a more metaphorical way of saying in soul, which means equal in soul to friend, meaning like at heart or something. Equal at heart, at some fundamental level, right? It's a change of inner attitude, something like that. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so let's go to the next verse. Please repeat after me, 6.10. Yogi yunjita satatam atmanam rahasi sthitaha ekaki yata chittatma nirashihi aparigraha. All right. Yata chitta atma, one whose mind, the chitta, is regulated, is yata, controlled. Okay. Nirashihi, one who is free from all desires and expectations. We'll get into the nuances a little later of these terms. Aparigraha, one who is free from the idea of possession, this idea of me and mine, and free from acquisitiveness. I want this, I want that. The yogi is ekaki. This is significant. This person, what's the way the Sri Aurobindo puts it? He is alone. He's not in the midst of groups of people. Because remember, he's practicing now meditation, which is meant to be done alone. Rahasi sitaha, he's in a secluded place. Right? He's sitting in a secluded place. So ekaki and rahasi sitaha kind of mean similar things. Okay. But ekaki in Bengali, eka means alone. In Hindi too, right? Doesn't it? Eka? Yeah.
One.
Right. And then satatam atmanam yunjita. One should satatam, constantly try to yunjita the atmanam. The atmanam here is the direct object. and then the different commentators have slightly different views on what it means to try to yunjita the Atman, but it means to bring. So Aurobindo renders it as let the yogin practice continually union with the self, capital S self. So try to be in union with the non-dual self at all times. Be in yoga with the Atman. That's the basic idea. Okay. All right. So now a couple things I want to draw your attention to. As usual, the term Atman here is ambiguous, and different commentators can interpret it in different ways. So in that first line, so Atmanam Rahasi Sitaha. Shankara, Ramanuja, and Swami Tapasyananda, all of them are unanimous in saying Atma here means the mind, actually. So try to control the mind, keep the mind fixed on the self. Sri Aurobindo is an outlier here and interprets Atman here as the non-dual self. And he's saying that you should the yogi should continually practice union with the non-dual self. I don't think it's obvious that it's one way or the other. I think you can think about it for yourself. It could also mean both, maybe. And then with regard to ekaki, I think this is significant. The word ekaki, it means alone. That doesn't mean that you should run off to a cave and, abandon your family and all that. But it means once in a while it's good to do that. That's why Sri Ramakrishna would even tell householders, every once in a while, leave everything. Drop your work, drop your family. Don't even bring your wife or your husband. And think of God exclusively. And he's very generous. So he'll say, if you can do it for 3 months. If that's too long, 3 weeks. If you can't do 3 weeks, do it for 3 days. If you can't do it for 3 days, 3 hours. But figure it out based on your own schedule and what you can do. That's why these 10-day, 3-day meditation retreats are very popular these days. Just to get away from everything. And people are dying to just deposit their cell phones and their smartphones and just kind of take a break, unplug, take a break. There's something people intuitively they recognize the importance of that. Another one of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings that's very significant here in this context that helps us to understand ekaki is he says, Dhyan korbe mone bone okone. Are there any Bengalis in this room? There's one over there. Okay, there we go. So, Dhyan korbe mone bone okone. He's this wonderful rhymester and word, he's great at wordplay. So he'd say, you should meditate, dhyan korbe, in 3 places. Mone, in the seclusion, in the privacy of your own mind, where nobody, I could be thinking anything and you won't know, unless you're a psychic. Bone, in a forest, in a secluded forest, where it's uninhabited, right? Or kone, it's interesting. Kone means in the corner of a room. Even if you're in a room meditating with other people, and it doesn't mean literally it could mean that you're literally in a corner. Some people prefer it, this guy's not here because he had to help somebody, but there's some people who prefer to be in the corner of a room so that they're not. But and there's some people who, and the Gita itself will use the 3 gunas, the framework of the gunas to explain this. People with a lot of rajas, even as spiritual aspirants, they have a little bit of a tendency to show off, and a little bit of a tendency to attract other people's attention and to want a little bit of, even at a subtle level, some kind of recognition, some praise. And now with social media, it's people are they'll go on some meditation session and they'll spend the majority of their time having people take pictures of themselves in lotus pose. So that then they get some Instagrammable photos that they can post and get as many likes as possible and retweets or whatever. So that's kind of rajasic, you know what I mean? The very sattvic spiritual aspirant is somebody who's going to go on these meditation retreats. They're not going to advertise it. They're not going to take pictures of themselves. And there's another, this is a little bit more subtle, but in Bilumat, I think I've talked about this before, but I'll just mention it again briefly. There are people who join in PPTC, which means as a brahmachari, you join in Bilumat and you get put through the grinder, and there's a very early morning meditation at 4 a.m, and hundreds of monks and brahmacharis are sitting together, meditating together. And some brahmacharis, when they first join, they spend less time thinking of God with their eyes closed and more time kind of looking out at the corner of their eye to see how long the other kids are meditating. And they have a little competition, I can sit a half hour longer than you and meditate. It's like a sattvic kind of competition, but still there's a little bit of a desire for, you want to be praised by the senior monks and look at how long this new brahmachari, he was deeply in meditation, he was sitting there for 2 hours, So there are a lot of dangers in spiritual life. We should be careful. Yeah, go ahead.
in our Hindu, this thing, we pray to God, we keep ourselves. I think that is the time we are away from everything.
Yeah.
That is what our sadhus all have given us. That
Right.
is the best time of our life.
Mhm.
Morning, afternoon,
Right,
anytime.
yeah.
I feel you are away from everything.
Yeah.
Yourself, nothing is there in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you are like, maybe that 5 minutes is
Right,
worth that
right.
1 year.
But
also,
take
I
some
feel.
time, set aside some time where you commune with the divine and just set everything aside. The Muslims have the namaz 5 times a day, and Hindus typically they'll say Brahma Muhurta. That's traditionally Brahma Muhurta means
Early morning.
when early morning, right when the sun rises or right before the sun rises, at the 2 junctions. And then again, that's why we have a Sandhya Arati, right, which is right when it's becoming just before it turns into night, so the evening when the sun sets.
From 4 to 8, right?
Huh?
In the afternoon is from 4 to 8.
Well,
Approximately.
that I don't know about the 4 to 8 thing, but
like
there might be
the
other.
second season of the day.
I'm not sure about the 4 to 8, but I know about these 2, the Brahma Muhurta and the Sandhya.
The Sandhya is in the afternoon.
Yeah, well, it's when the afternoon turns into evening kind of a thing.
Evening,
Sunset.
Sunset.
Sunsetish. Sunset, yeah.
No particular time.
And Raja Maharaj, Brahmanandaji, he adds, and this is, don't try this at home because it might mess you up, but middle of the night and midnight. He says, because everybody's asleep then, and Ramakrishna will say, again rhyming, he'll say, there are 3 kinds of people who stay up in the middle of the night. Yogis, bhogis, and rogis. Yogis are these, spiritual aspirants. Bhogis are people who are going to nightclubs and doing much worse things, like Puff Daddy and whatever. We're about to see what he did, I guess. I don't know. Okay, and then bhogi, and then what's the third one? Rogi. People who are sick. Roga means illness. And so unhealthy people, they can't sleep because they're in great pain. So, and it's a beautiful rhyme. Yogi, bhogi, rogi. He is really a wordsmith. See how much you're missing out on if you don't know Bengali? Well, Hindi people they can also, Marathi people can appreciate these rhymes. Okay. So, I think Ekaki also we can link it to these verses later in the Gita, chapter 17 or 18, where it talks about like a sattvic spiritual aspirant and somebody who, it's between you and God, right? And nobody else, you're not trying to advertise it, you're not, you're being very kind of careful about not attracting other people's attention. But the more Rajasic spiritual aspirant is somebody who's kind of like looking for a little bit of name and fame, a little praise, a little recognition. So I think Ekaki also has that implication. And then Nirashihi Aparigraha, that last phrase, I think Ramanuja has an interesting interpretation here, which is kind of insightful. Oh no, I didn't bring it, so I can't. Oh no, here it is. Okay, so he says Nirashihi means don't be dependent on anything or anyone other than the Atman. And so dependent, this is important, right? Because anytime there's an emotional attachment, there's also dependence. And at a certain level, it's a kind of slavery. No matter what the attachment is. You could be attached to your spouse, your partner, your kid. Sometimes a parent's whole identity is bound up with their kid. So then that's also a kind of slavery, because it means that depending on what the kid does, your well-being depends on that. So the kid's happy, you're happy. If the kid's sad, you're sad. But that's also, you should try to maintain a certain kind of detachment while still being loving, right? And then aparigraha, Ramanuja says, without this sense of me and mine. So this is, Sri Aurobindo will say the same thing, without an idea of possessing. That's my child, that's my car, that's my house. Turiyanji's mother, she really had this, and so when she would feed her children, she would feed the whole neighborhood of kids. She would invite the kids too, and she would look upon her neighbor's kids in the same way that she would look upon her own. And that doesn't mean she's less loving to her children. That means she's equally loving. That's actually a very spiritual quality, actually. Some people think that, well, if you're detached, it's somehow cold. You don't have any special affection. But Holy Mother, that's what she meant. She literally meant, I have the same love for this Muslim thief as I have for my beloved Charananda. That's not less love, but that's a detached love. It's what Sri Ramakrishna says is the difference between Maya and Daya. Maya is selfish attachment, selfish love for me and mine. See, there's always an element of selfish. If you love somebody or something because it's yours, selfish. I mean, at some level, it's selfish, right? It's because that person or that thing belongs to you that you love it so much. But then that's not such a great achievement in a certain sense. But can you love somebody who's not yours? right? That doesn't belong to you in a certain way. And treat that person with equal love. That's what Sri Ramakrishna calls daya. And the only way to really achieve that is to see the same divine in everybody. So it's a very high achievement. It requires spiritual realization of the divine in everyone. But we can try to approximate that as spiritual aspirants. Okay. Okay, now we get to these interesting verses on like very concrete details on how we should meditate, how we should sit, what we should sit on. This is interesting. So let's read the next two verses together. Please repeat after me. So 11 and 12. Shuchau deshe pratishtapya stiram asanam atmanaha natyuchitam nati nicham chailajina kushottaram. Okay, then 12. Tatraikagram manah kritva yata chitta indriyakriyaha upavishyasane yunjyad yogam atmavishuddhaye. Okay, so this, I'm not going to go word by word, but what is his translation? The yogi should sit in a pure spot, which should set in a pure spot, in a clean spot, his firm seat. Okay, it's thiram. This is important. Every detail is important here. I'll tell you because since coming to Hollywood, we have a bunch of meditation cushions in our shrine. And I keep trying new ones, and none of them is quite satisfying to me. Like either it's too soft, or it's not high enough, or so each. But it's important. So here, let's parse the adjectives here, and then we'll talk about what like the ideal cushion should be. So na ati uchitam nati nicham. So it means it should neither be too high or too low. Why is that significant? I think the idea is you want to relieve pressure from the knees. But if it's too high, your spine's not going to be straight. And then there might be other problems as well. And so there's kind of like, for each person it's going to vary. There's no one size fits all meditation cushion for everyone. You have to figure out based on your needs and your knees. So a pun on needs and knees. Nobody gets it. Okay. And Chaila Ajina Kusha Uttaram. It's even giving the details on what your asana, what your seat should be made of. So it should be covered with a cloth, with a deer skin, with sacred grass, kusha. Okay, so you don't need to get all these implements, but the idea is you shouldn't be very casual with your asana. When I first joined at Vivekananda University, I had my asana, and I was talking to a monk, and I casually kind of put my asana on the ground, and he immediately picked it up and said, no, you should never put it on the ground like that, because you're thinking of, obviously you put it on the ground when you're meditating, but don't treat it so flippantly, because you should also treat that as holy, because you're sitting on it to think of God, and so treat it with respect and reverence, and put it, where it belongs in your closet or whatever. Small things matter. Holy Mother, there's an incident where in India they broom the floor. People broom the floor with what's called a jhadu, at least in Bengal. What do you call it in Hindi or Marathi?
Jhadu.
Same thing, huh? Oh, okay, jhadu. So it's very hard to explain what it is. Anyway, it's made of horsehair, right? Often.
It's a broom, but it's
broom in the U.S. they'll immediately assume a giant stick, and then you're standing, but that's not what it is.
It's a short stick.
You
Horse
whisk broom.
Yeah.
There's a term for jhadu. Ooh, that's nice. I've never heard that. Whisk broom. So you crouch on the floor and you do this thing where you, and I think it was somebody after doing the jhadu, they tossed it to the corner of a room, and Holy Mother scolded them and said, "Don't toss it like that, right? Because there's God even in that jhadu." So treat everything with the respect and reverence that's due to it. Okay. So I think that's the idea. We don't need to take it too literally. Like, I don't have a tiger skin, so I'm done for. I can't. I'm not going to make any spiritual progress.
Deer skin.
Deer skin. Yeah. Oh, sorry, not tiger skin. Deer skin.
That would make it harder.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And there, seated with a concentrated mind and with the workings of the mental consciousness and the senses under control, that person should practice yoga for self-purification. Okay, so what is the purpose of meditation? It's to purify the mind. We should always remember that. And I would say more generally, actually. That's why the Gita also, this is not like you do this at the expense of any other yoga, right? It's not that you should sit all day in meditation pose and meditate. That's not the Gita's approach. Remember that Krishna is telling Arjuna to fight in a war, right? But just as a lot of us are, we're householders, we're busy, we have to raise a family, we have to go to work. But, as you were saying, set aside some time every single day at fixed times and just commune with God, right? That's the idea, whether it's for 5 minutes or for a half hour or for 1 hour or more. But you should set aside some fixed time and do that. That's extremely important. And if you can associate everything related to that meditation practice with holiness, even the asana that you sit on, then that actually helps the mind to get concentrated in those times. That's the idea. So don't be casual about it. And I would add also that Swamiji says the aim of all the yogas is Atma Shuddhaya, Atma Vishuddhaya, is self-purification. What's the purpose of bhakti practices? Coming to arati, meditating on God, prayer, purifying the mind. What's the purpose in karma yoga? Offer everything you do to the divine, all your duties, when you raise your children, when you go to work and all that. Purification of mind. So in the same way, the main aim of this meditation practice is to purify the mind. But don't be a hypocrite about it. I think we already encountered a verse, right, which says that if those people who close their eyes and sitting in a perfect lotus pose but are thinking of sense objects rather than God or the self, they're hypocrites. Mithyachara sa uchyate. They're mithyachara. So for that period of time, when you are sitting in meditation, do your best to control the senses to prevent the mind from going out to worldly things. Of course, we won't perfectly succeed, but you should have a certain modicum, a minimal level of sincerity in the meditation practice. And another thing I'd add is, better to sit in meditation for 5 minutes with great concentration and to actually think of God than to sit for 2 hours in a perfect lotus pose and have the mind wander here and there in a million places and get 5 Instagrammable pictures, which you then post on social media. On a deer skin, right? So it's really about quality rather than quantity. That's extremely important. It's extremely important. There's an incident involving japa with Sri Ramakrishna when Hazra, this troublemaker Hazra, who lived with him for some time and was always doing japa and developed a superiority complex because he's always doing his japa, turning his beads. And he would actually judge other people and say, they don't do as much japa as I do. So Sri Ramakrishna noticed that. And so one day Sri Ramakrishna takes his beads from Hazra and says, let me try those. And he takes it with his right hand first. And he tries to turn the beads with them. He couldn't. His fingers wouldn't let him turn the beads. So he had to switch to his left hand, which is considered the impure hand in India. And then he turns it once or twice, taking the name of God. And immediately he goes into samadhi and his hands stop. Quality. And there are other people who are turning the beads all day. And they're not going into samadhi. They're not making all that much progress, right? So it's all about the inner attitude as you do the japa. That's what's crucial. And there's another danger also with, actually, now this brahmacharya is no longer in the order, so I can mention it. But when I was in Belumat, in PPTC, that's the same. There are all sorts of people who join. And we monks refer to PPTC joining in Belumat as Howrah Station, which is a train station, which is very busy. People come and go. So it's kind of like that. So you get like people with varying degrees of sincerity coming and going. And so one of them, what we do is we all, as a group, we'd all sit for evening arati in Belumat, so hundreds of people sitting together. And then the tradition is that all the monks will do side temple pranams. They'll do pranams at all the side temples. So for Swamiji, Holy Mother, Brahmananda, and so on. And while he's doing it, he has this little bag with his beads inside, and he's doing this and telling his beads. And that's not encouraged in our tradition. It's encouraged in other traditions, but it's not encouraged in our tradition. We're encouraged to do japa, take the name of God, but privately and quietly, so that nobody else will know. That's why Sri Ramakrishna is teaching dhyan korbe mone bone okone. So do it in your mind, mentally. But you don't have to advertise to the world that you're doing it, right? But the moment you have this bag, right, everybody knows you're doing japa, right? So this kid who just joined, he's doing his Saitapa pranams, but doing this at the same time and looking very pious and this and that. And then I happened to overhear this once senior Swami stopped him, and he gave him a nice scolding. You might think it's good, he's doing japa and all that, but he said, look, this is not in line with our tradition. Do japa, but you don't need to tell others or show others that you're doing it, because there's always a danger of ego creeping in. A few years later, just to not to get depressing, but he was actually removed from the order for different reasons. But anyway, so even these subtle things, these are little warning signs. You have to be very careful about these things. You might think it's a small thing, and well, he's doing japa, that's a good thing. But be careful with yourself. Don't be judging other people. But with respect to yourself, notice the subtle ways that ego can pop up. One of our sannyasa mantras, actually, when you go through the sannyasa term, I'm allowed to say it only because it's mentioned in Lila Prashnanga, actually. If you read the whole biography of Sri Ramakrishna by Sharananda, he actually goes through a lot of the sannyasa mantras. It's called the Viraja Homa. And one of them is, may I be liberated even from the avyakta ahankara, from the subtle manifestations of ego. It's a very important verse. That's one of the sannyasa mantras that when we take the sannyasa vows, that's another prayer that we do. Okay. It's 10:36 already, so we should probably call it a day. Okay, so we got through a few verses. And so let me repeat one more time. The next class, unfortunately, I don't know which day in June it's going to be, but I will update you on the WhatsApp group and then also under the YouTube description for people following online. But the assignment for our next class is reading 6.15 to 23 of the Bhagavad Gita, and to answer the study questions, which are based primarily on verses 17 to 18 of chapter 6. And I think you'll find the study questions interesting. Thank you, everyone. Any questions? Sorry, I didn't give you an opportunity to ask any questions. No? No? We're good. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. I'm glad you guys are trying to defend Sri Aurobindo, actually, but I don't know. I still feel he could have done something with Gyan and Vijnana.
I think he does